What would be most useful for you in our conversation today?
Well, I wrote out a few questions. I'm taking the test on January 11th. It's a different date than the North American test because I'm in Argentina.
Okay, cool.
So it's also a paper test because they haven't rolled out the digital version yet internationally.
Right.
So one of my questions is, because you took the paper test, and how does that work between sections? Obviously with the digital, they can just end the section and take you to the next one. So how does that work with the paper test? Is there like a minute or two between sections where the proctor is making sure everybody is at the right spot, or?
It's probably not a minute, but you're right that there is maybe a couple seconds or 10 seconds in between each one. So it's like pencils down. Okay, is everyone's pencil down? Okay, good. Now let's continue to the next section. Go. So it's something along those lines.
Okay. And do you know, are the international tests the same ones that they give people like that? Because I think January 13th is the North American test date. Do you know if I'll be taking the same test?
It's not the same. They're using an undisclosed test, a test that's never before been released, and they will give students outside North America a different test than those inside North America.
Okay, but it's not a test that I've taken, like a practice test before.
Correct.
Oh, man. Okay. Okay. So I guess tips so my score right now, would it be helpful for you to know like where I am?
Yeah, sure.
So I took one this morning. This is the 5th or 6th that I've taken. I got 164. I'd like to maintain that, or a 165. I'm kind of in the low 160s bouncing around. Reading comprehension is where I lose the most points. And for example, I just realized that if I don't use my pencil to follow along the test, that I can go faster. So other suggestions you have for reading comprehension?
Yeah, sure. So along those same lines, I would avoid sub-vocalizing. So meaning that don't like mutter the words to yourself under your breath as you're reading. Mm-hmm. That slows you down. You want to disconnect physical speech from what you mentally read.
Okay.
You ever find that you sub-vocalize in that way?
Yeah, or like in the logic games, I'm like actually trying to say the names versus just the first letter.
Right. So you definitely want to avoid that as well.
Yeah. Get out of the habit. Yeah. Okay.
And for reading comp, how much note-taking do you do? How much underlining, highlighting, or writing on the side?
0 note-taking.
Awesome.
I used to do a lot more underlining and circling, but as of these last few practice tests, I've done maybe none.
Great.
Just because I don't want to waste time with that.
Good.
Not even, I found that it hasn't even been helpful. The things that I underline, I don't go back to them. So.
Yeah, funny how that works.
Yeah. I don't know. So logic games. This morning I took practice test 76. I don't know if you have the games all memorized for what they are. This is the photographer game where it's like, okay, well, before I explain that, let me explain what my problem is knowing which type of game board to draw. So the other day I took I did the prep test that had the flower game. Do you remember that? It's like you have the 3 bouquets and you can reuse all of the different flowers.
Yeah, I'm familiar.
So you should do a grid, right?
Well, that's a stylistic choice. You could do a grid or you could do slots. It's really up to you.
And I did slots and completely, it was so much easier when I did the grid next. And the grid you do when you're reusing different game pieces, like you can use different flowers more than once. But that's not always the case when you're drawing game boards. I don't know if you have just some like ideas of how to know which game board to draw that will be the most helpful.
Sure. And I think the question ultimately stems from an idea that there is a perfect solution to this, which in my opinion, there really isn't.
Okay.
Part of getting a top score on games is being comfortable enough to adapt to different situations without using a pre-prescribed approach.
Right. Because if you can't get that pre-prescribed approach, you're screwed.
Yeah, and you want to maintain some flexibility, especially for those weirder curveball games that don't fit neatly within a category.
Yeah.
Those games, they're still vulnerable to the same techniques in general, even if the style that you use to draw them might be different, or even if there isn't as much work you can do up front. It might be a little bit different, but ultimately the principles around solving games, like making inferences and like using previous work, still come into play.
Right. Like the game on this prep test I did today is the one with the offices. Remember, where they have to, like, each person had listed their offices in order of preference, and that's completely a different type of game than they normally throw at you. Yeah. I mean, it was terrible, but actually I did really well on it.
Awesome. Yeah. They're not necessarily harder. They're just different.
Yeah. And it's that initial shock of like, what do I do? I'm getting paralyzed, and how to keep moving.
Yeah. So one thing I would actually want you to do, Gene, is we want you to do a bunch of those curveball games between now and the January LSAT, just so that you can get used to putting yourself in those unfamiliar situations where there may not be a clear right answer in terms of how to go about drawing a diagram, whether it's a grid or slots or something else altogether. What can you do when there's not a clear answer and you can't immediately consciously relate it back to a game you've done before?
Right. So being 2 weeks out, 2 weeks from tomorrow is the test date. Like, do you recommend a ton of cramming in that last week or no?
Absolutely not. So don't try to cram this. This is not a test of memorization. You're not going to learn it all in 2 weeks and then empty your brain afterwards.
Right.
It's really a skills test. It's a test of pattern recognition and understanding the fundamental skills they're testing, like critical thinking, making deductions, and so on. So I would want you to ultimately do maybe just 1 or 2 timed exams per week over the next 2 weeks, along with detailed review of those exams. And then if you want to drill certain things like the weird curveball logic games or like certain reading comp passages, you can do that, but I wouldn't try to do more than that.
Okay. So like at most 4 more practice tests before the January 11th, like 2 next week and 2 the next week.
Generally speaking, yes.
Yeah, that was my plan.
What are your other obligations?
Basically nothing. So I have time to study, but I mean, I'm also in danger of spending all day, every day studying for the LSAT because I don't have other obligations right now.
Yeah, then I think 2 exams a week for you, plus review of those exams, plus drilling is more than enough.
Okay. And what score in general, I know it depends on what school you apply to, which I don't even know which school I'm going to apply to, but what score in general is good if you're needing and wanting scholarship money?
It's not really like the higher the better.
Okay. But I mean, can you get scholarship money with a 164?
Yeah, it depends on the school.
Okay. I'm not going to be going for like a high school. I'd be willing to go to a low school if they gave me more scholarship money. But what score is too low to get scholarship money?
Again, it depends on the school, but I would imagine that anything below 150 is probably not going to get you much, if any, scholarship money anywhere. But I would suggest go on LSAC's site, look at their LSAT GPA calculator.
Oh, and I saw that.
You can put in your GPA and see where you stack up with hypothetical LSAT scores, given your undergraduate GPA. And if you are above the median for a school, that means you've got a shot at some decent or significant even scholarship money. But a low-ranked school, 160 might get you a full ride. For a high-ranked school, it'll get you nothing. But a 165 or a 170 at a better-ranked school then puts you in the running for the scholarship money.
Okay. That's calculator. Okay. So, yeah. Those were my questions that I wrote down. I don't know. What else suggestions you have?
Well, since you're 2 weeks out, let's talk a little bit about what your full-length timed exams look like when you're taking them. So I'm curious, what are you doing to simulate test day conditions?
I put 35 minutes on my phone and push start, and I do the section, and then when the timer goes off, like today I was really good. I gave myself 0 time between each section because I just pushed repeat on my timer and flipped to the next page and went to the section. I did 3 sections and then took a 15-minute break. And then I did the 4th section, and then I grabbed another section from another prep test so that I was doing 5 sections.
Good. So those are all good things. I want to suggest a couple of modifications for you. Okay. One is that you can't bring your cell phone to the test.
No, I know. Yeah.
And you're going to use an analog watch because you're doing.
And I don't have a clock. So I need to get something. Yeah. So do you recommend looking at the time though during the test?
That's a personal decision. It depends on how comfortable you are with your own internal pacing. A lot of people like to have an analog watch to keep at their desk just so they can keep time themselves, because where you don't know what your test center is going to have. If they're going to have a clock on the wall, for example, will there be a clock at all? Will it be in front of you, or will it be behind you? And you'd have to turn around.
Gosh, yeah.
So get your hands on the most basic, simple analog watch you can and start using that along with your time to practice tests.
Okay, yeah.
And then you could bring that on test day.
Yeah, that's a good advice.
The other thing I would suggest for your experimental sections is, of course, don't always make it section 5, because it could be anywhere. It could be any of the 5 sections.
Yeah.
So you could insert it as section 1, section 2, section 3, section 4. And if you don't mind mauling your books, you could rip them out of the binding to splice in the experimental section into those different spots, so it won't be totally obvious to you which one it is. Or if you're using PDFs or photocopies, you could print them out.
Okay. So this is what the LSAT, like the prep test book, is this what it actually looks like?
Yeah, that's the bubble sheet for the paper LSAT.
That's what it looks like. Okay. Is it okay if you circle the numbers or put lines next to the numbers, or you shouldn't do that because that'll mess up the ability of them to read it?
I would keep it really, really faint if you're going to make any markings at all, because you don't want it to screw up the machine.
So if you want to skip number 10 and remind yourself to come back to it later, you just do that on your scratch paper. You write number 10.
Yeah, well, except you're not getting scratch paper on the paper LSAT. You have to do it on the booklet.
Okay, there's no scratch paper.
On the paper LSAT, there is not. So that's another thing to start simulating. You've only got the page containing the question. So for logic games, you've only got the little empty space around the question text. And then for logical reasoning, if you want to flag a question, you've got to circle it or put an asterisk next to it really big, and then remember to go back and flip around for that.
Okay. I thought they were going to give scratch paper too.
Unfortunately, not for the paper LSAT.
What do you think? Paper or digital better?
What's better? I think I think you're kind of lucky to be doing paper, because at least at the moment, digital, there's been a ton of tech issues with the digital LSAT rollout. And so I think paper is more reliable. I actually was talking with someone earlier who got accommodations. There are still a few exceptions in North America where if someone has accommodations, they could get paper. And I said, choose the paper because of all the digital LSAT tech glitches. I think paper is more tried and true. We're more familiar with it. And I think you're better off with it. So I think you're lucky to be doing it this way.
I know. I was thrilled when I heard that the digital wasn't international.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Awesome. Well, I think that's my time.
Awesome. Well, it was great connecting with you. Before we sign off,
too.
What would you say is the biggest insight you got from our call today?
As the little detail tips, like I really do need to start using the analog watch and not verbalizing in my head what I'm reading, and just, I guess, some confirmation that I am doing my practice tests the right way and that I shouldn't be cramming the week before. I think maybe not a big, huge insight, but just the little details that help and are the bigger takeaways.
Awesome. Well, please keep in touch and let me know how it goes for you and if I can help in any way.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I'll wish you all the best and take care.